Hook 3. Imagine being paralyzed in your own bed, fully awake, while your own cousin slowly poisons you to steal your empire. That was the brutal reality for New York's deadliest mafia boss, Dominic Costello. His highly paid medical staff was actually executing a flawless assassination plot, but they made one fatal mistake. They ignored the oversized cleaning woman. She found the hidden thallium smuggled in the cure and woke the sleeping dragon. Now the bloodbath is about to begin. It is 3 in the morning, the heavy hour when the city sleeps and dark secrets finally breathe. Dominic Costello, the most feared crime boss in New York, is fading away in his own bed, and the terrifying truth is that nobody cares. The streets call it a mysterious illness. Others whisper that karma is collecting a blood debt, but there is a twist, and you and I are going to unpack this together. Bridget, a quiet cleaning woman, treated like a ghost by the cartel, is the only person who sees the reality. She discovers the poison. Suddenly, this entirely invisible woman holds the life of a dying king in her rough, soapy hands. It proves that life has a funny way of making the most overlooked people in the room the most dangerous. Come with me, let us step inside. The Costello mansion is a cold monument to excess and deep paranoia. Imported marble floors demand special care, while the thick plaster walls absorb the echoes of whispered death threats. Bridget knows the ugly reality of this house far better than the mobsters who claim to own it. Right now, she pushes her heavy supply cart down a shadowed hallway. The squeaking wheels make a lonely sound in the dark, but nobody bothers to scold her. The cold truth is that these men only speak to Bridget when they need a dark red stain scrubbed out of the floorboards. She is 28, exhausted, carrying an emotional weight far beyond her physical frame. It teaches us a quiet truth sometimes. The heaviest burdens we carry are the ones nobody else ever takes the time to notice. In a vicious syndicate obsessed with glittering wives and glamorous mistresses, Bridget simply does not fit the mold. She wears a dull gray uniform, her hair tied in a tired knot. She knows exactly what these ruthless enforcers see when they look at her. They see a slow, invisible shadow. They see an absolute nobody. But here is a profound lesson that changes everything. Sometimes being entirely overlooked is the greatest power you can possess in a room full of monsters. These men, with loaded weapons holstered against their ribs, casually discuss extortion racks right over her bowed head. They assume the cleaning staff does not have ears. They blindly forget that the people who scrub away their worst sins are the ones who end up holding all their deepest secrets. The cartel soldiers lean against the expensive wallpaper, blowing thick cigar smoke into the air, barely shifting to let her cart squeeze by. To them, Bridget is barely human. She is just another piece of furniture in their violent world. Suddenly, a harsh voice snaps through the smoke, barking at her to scrub the baseboards in the main study. Bridget stops and turns to see Vincent Romano, the underboss and Dominic's own cousin. He is dressed in a flawless charcoal suit, his eyes burning with a greasy, unkempt arrogance that was never there before the boss fell ill. Bridget simply drops her chin, murmuring a soft apology, playing the broken servant to absolute perfection. Unchecked pride will always blind a man to the quiet threats standing right in front of him. Vincent does not give her the dignity of a second glance. He pivots to his enforcer, openly bragging that the city docks will be his by Thursday. Look, he even orders his men to keep lying to Dominic, telling them to assure the boss everything is fine if he somehow wakes up. The sheer disrespect is staggering. Dominic Costello used to be a name that made criminals sweat. He was a cold-blooded tactician who claimed the throne at 30. Those sharp grey eyes used to miss absolutely nothing. But 6 months ago, the untouchable king collapsed. What began as a mild tremor turned him into a paralyzed prisoner in his own home. Betrayal is rarely a sudden attack. It is usually a slow poison poured by the very people standing right beside you. The brutal reality of Dominic's fall is hard to witness. A man who once crushed rival empires cannot even lift a glass of water, down on her knees against the damp baseboards. Bridget watches Dr. Arthur Pendleton glide down the hallway. This is the private physician raking in $5,000 a day to supposedly ease the king's suffering. He walks with a sleek silver case, flanked by 2 massive guards. Bridget twists her sponge, letting the dirty water bleed into her bucket, and catches the doctor's reflection in the polished marble. Something is deeply wrong. A healer losing a patient naturally carries a heavy sorrow. Pendleton does not look defeated at all. He looks energized, like a man who has already counted his blood money. Greed rots the human soul far faster than any physical disease ever could. There is an almost joyful bounce in Pendleton's step as he whispers to Vincent. Bridget spent years mopping ordinary hospital rooms before taking this cartel job. She knows the sour, lingering scent of death, and she knows the slumped shoulders of a doctor losing a hard fight. Pendleton is not fighting to save anyone. He carries the smug glow of an executioner getting away with murder. Later that evening, the head housekeeper corners Bridget in the steamy laundry room. The older woman is pale and shaking, announcing that another girl just walked off the job. The maid tried to change the sheets in the master suite, and Dominic threw a heavy glass straight at the wall and terrifying her into quitting. It is a harsh reality. Fear can either break you in half, or it can be the very spark that finally wakes you up. Bridget methodically folds the thick Egyptian cotton towels, letting the housekeeper's frantic orders wash over her. Starting tomorrow morning, Bridget is permanently assigned to the master suite. The rules are absolute. Get in, scrub the floors, and get out. Do not speak to him. Never look him in the eye. If the broken king starts raging, well, keep your head down and stay totally silent. Bridget gives a single, obedient nod, but underneath her ribs, her heart beats a frantic rhythm. Everyone in this mansion is terrified of that room. Even paralyzed Dominic Costello casts a long, incredibly lethal shadow. But looking down at her worn, chapped hands, a dark spark of purpose suddenly flares to life. It is funny how danger calls to us when we finally have nothing left to lose. The air inside the master bedroom is thick and suffocating, wrapping tightly around her throat the second she steps inside. It smells of sharp rubbing alcohol, stale sandalwood, and the sour heat of a fever that simply refuses to break. Bridget guides her cart past the heavy oak doors, the squeaking wheels sinking into the plush Persian rug. Thick velvet curtains block out the morning sun, plunging the room into a deep, oppressive gloom. And there, swallowed by a massive mahogany bed, lies the legendary boss himself. Bridget tries to obey the rules and keep her eyes on the floor, but the pull is just too strong. The man who used to own the city is now a ghost. His skin has turned a sickly gray, stretched tight over a hollow jaw. Illness violently strips away our armor, revealing the fragile humanity we try so hard to hide. Dark, bruised circles drag down the corners of Dominic's eyes. The former boss is tethered to a rattling metal pole, a slow drip of clear liquid feeding directly into his arm. He remains perfectly still as Bridget begins to work. She presses herself against the edges of the room, carefully dusting the heavy mahogany shelves, holding her breath to avoid making a single sound. It is a painful truth when the world treats you as a burden. You quickly master the survival art, of becoming entirely invisible. Despite her size, she glides across the floor like quiet smoke. Suddenly, the brass door handle turns. Dr. Pendleton strides right into the gloom, with Vincent trailing closely on his heels. Panic seizes Bridget's chest. She instantly presses her back flat against the dark corner, holding completely still. Hidden in the shadows, Bridget holds her breath. Vincent asks about his cousin's condition, layering his voice with thick, artificial concern. Underneath that fake sympathy, you and I can hear the raw impatience of a vulture waiting for a meal. Pendleton strolls to the bedside, his voice cool and detached. He announces that the physical deterioration is perfectly on schedule, noting the paralysis is creeping into the lungs. He calls it a tragedy, but his tone drips with arrogant victory. Vincent leans over the mattress, nervously asking if Dominic can hear them. The doctor just chuckles. He taps the medicine bag and promises the sedatives have entirely erased his mind. He stands over the most lethal man in the state and casually calls him a vegetable. Trust is truly the sharpest knife we ever hand our enemies. Bridget risks a tiny glance around the wall, locking her eyes on Dominic's pale face. His eyelids are half shut, gaze fixed on the ceiling. But beneath the fog of those narcotics, she sees it. A sharp, violent twitch in his jaw. The muscles clench with a silent, screaming fury. A cold chill runs down Bridget's spine as the horrifying truth clicks into place. The king is trapped inside his own body, but he hears every word. The doctor opens his case, drawing a clear liquid into a syringe. He jokes about pain management, injecting the poison directly into the plastic tube. Vincent mutters, asking how much longer they must wait. Pendleton smiles a wicked grin. A few more weeks, he promises, and the heart will finally stop. It is absolutely terrifying how easily pure evil hides behind a pristine white coat. Stick with me tonight. This is the exact moment the shadows of this crime family finally start to talk. Bridget claps a trembling hand over her mouth, biting back a terrified scream. She's watching a slow, agonizing murder unfold right before her eyes. The doctor carelessly drops an empty glass vial into a metal wastebasket. The men simply walk out, sealing the heavy doors behind them. The silence that follows is crushing. For 5 long minutes, she does not dare to breathe. She is just a maid scraping by in Queens. Getting tangled in syndicate business means a guaranteed trip to the bottom of the river, courtesy of Vincent. Sometimes, the hardest lesson in life is realizing that true survival often demands we completely ignore the desperate suffering of others. The second her cheap rubber soles step from the shadows, her breath catches in her chest. She locks eyes with Dominic. The old lion cannot turn his head, but his bloodshot, storm-gray eyes track her every move. They swim in a raw fury that hits her like a physical blow. It is the agony of a king betrayed by his own blood. He cannot cry for help, buried alive inside his decaying flesh by the crime family he built. Bridget swallows the bitter fear in her throat, knuckle, nose turning bone, white against her dusting cloth. She approaches the ruined Mafia boss, her voice trembling as she whispers that she is only here to empty the trash. Power is truly a fragile illusion. You can rule a city, but eventually, your life might rest entirely in the hands of the unseen person sweeping your floors. Let's pause and look at the brutal reality of what she uncovers. Her knees pop painfully as she digs through the medical waste. Her gloved fingers scrape against cold glass, pulling out the tiny amber vial left by that doctor. Later, wrapped in the suffocating silence of her cramped apartment, the harsh blue glare of her laptop screen illuminates her exhausted face. She peels back the torn label to read the faded ink. Thallium sulfate, she types it in, and the color drains out of her cheeks. This is no miracle cure. It is an old, vicious heavy metal. We are talking about highly toxic rat poison. It is a harsh life lesson. The most lethal betrayals in this world never come with a loud warning. They simply slip into our daily routines, perfectly disguised as an act of loving care. The cruelty of this scheme goes deeper than simple murder. This poison is entirely tasteless and odorless. It systematically shreds the brain to mimic a terminal nerve disease. Adding to the horror, she discovers the second drug is a heavy-duty surgical paralytic. The doctor is not treating the weary boss. He is medically torturing him, freezing his vocal cords so the man cannot fight back. Bridget leans back in her rickety chair, listening to the old wood groan. She is holding a guaranteed death warrant in her shaking palm. She whispers into the dark, begging for an answer. Going to the police would be a fatal mistake. The syndicate would erase her from existence before sunrise. You quickly learn that in a broken world, doing the right thing often demands absolutely everything you have. It is a sickening reality, but Dominic's traitorous cousin Vincent already owns half the city police. If she tries to warn the loyal captains, they will demand hard proof she does not possess. Vincent would silence her forever. There is only one man left on Earth who can fix this mare, and he is a paralyzed ghost trapped in his own bed. By the next morning, a bitter rain beats against the windows, drowning out the quiet of the massive mansion. Bridget pushes her rusted cleaning cart into the master suite at exactly 10 o'clock. She has studied their routines perfectly. The doctor is gone until noon, and Vincent is away making deals. She steps inside and throws the heavy iron lock on the oak doors. Sometimes, true bravery is just having the guts to step into the storm, completely alone. That heavy lock clicks shut. In the suffocating quiet of the room, it rings out like a solitary sniper shot. Dominic lies exactly as he did yesterday, his chest barely rising, wheezing like a ruined engine. Right above his head, the medical bag is slowly dripping pure betrayal straight into his helpless veins. Bridget marches directly toward that pole. Her hands are sweating and trembling violently, but she forces her fingers to clamp that wretched tube shut. The toxic rhythm finally stops. She pulls out a pair of sterilized scissors smuggled in her coat and severs the entire line with a sharp snap. Just like that, Dominic's storm-gray eyes snap violently open. It is a profound reminder that sometimes all it takes to wake a sleeping lion is one small, terrifying act of everyday courage. Dominic stares at her, his icy gray eyes fighting through the suffocating fog of the paralyzing drugs. He forces out a broken whisper, grinding like dry leaves on concrete, demanding to know who she is. It is the first time Bridget has heard the Don speak. He is heartbreakingly weak, yet that terrifying underworld energy still lingers in the room. Her heart slams against her ribs, but she roots her feet firmly to the floor and tells him she is stopping the drip. He tries to roar for his armed guards, threatening to end her, but it surfaces as nothing more than a pathetic gasp. She tells him to save his breath. You see, sometimes in life, true power is not about the criminal empire you build. It is simply about who chooses to stand by your bed when the heavy crown finally falls. She leans in and completely shatters his reality. His guards are downstairs playing poker. His own cousin is carving up his territory for the Russians. And that trusted doctor? He is the one digging the grave. Dominic's eyes stretch wide as the cold spark of a blood vendetta ignites. Bridget holds the empty amber vial to the dim bedside lamp. She lays out the brutal math. It is rat poison mixed with surgical paralytics. He is not fading from a tragic illness. His family is slowly murdering him. The silence turns heavy, pressing down on them like deep water. Let us sit with this together for a moment. The deepest wounds in our lives are always inflicted by the very people we trust to hold the knife. Dominic stares at the tiny glass, then locks his hardened gaze onto her face. For the first time, the ruthless Don truly sees her. He takes in her exhausted face, the loose strands of hair, and the overwhelming terror she is fighting to swallow. He forces his raw throat to work, asking a single agonizing question. Why risk everything for a fallen king? Bridget takes a fragile breath. She tells him she is doing it because letting him die alone in the dark is simply wrong. Her voice cracks as she explains she knows exactly what it feels like to be invisible, to let others decide your worth without a fight. They already treat him like a rotting corpse. Empathy, you see, is a quiet bridge built by two broken souls finding common ground in the cold shadows. Dominic absorbs her honest words, closing his tired eyes before letting out a dry, bitter, and terrifying chuckle. He whispers through the dim shadows, demanding her real identity. She replies softly that she is just Bridget, the invisible cleaning lady. He repeats her name, his voice gathering a dangerous strength now that the steady stream of poison is cut. He drags his heavy fingers across the cold silk sheets, the agonizing effort leaving him winded. He warns her that the traitors will notice the poisons them. But Bridget is 10 steps ahead, revealing a bag of harmless salt water to hook into his port. Overconfidence is always a villain's greatest weakness. That arrogant doctor would never stoop to check a lowly cleaner's work. Dominic's storm grey eyes lock onto hers, suddenly burning with the pure hellfire of a resurrected man. The helpless dying victim is officially gone. The apex predator of the underworld is awake. Though trapped inside a failing vessel, his mind remains as sharp as shattered glass. He warns her she is taking a suicidal risk. If his cousin discovers this, a quick death will be a luxury. Bridget does not blink, calmly pulling the fake medical bag from beneath her apron. Then, the ruthless crime boss drops his emotional armor and tells her to call him Dom. Bridget freezes. The terrifying intimacy of a Mafia kingpin offering his nickname to a total stranger sends a cold tremor down her spine. Trust is the rarest currency in a dark world built entirely on lies, and he just handed her all he has left. Dom's eyes drill into her soul as he maps out their survival. The poison is deep in his bones. He desperately needs an antidote called Prussian blue. He explains the chemical will purge the poison from his veins. Bridget swears to find it, but delivers a brutal condition. He must keep playing the rotting corpse, or his family will put a bullet between his eyes. Dom flashes a wicked, unhinged smile in the shadows. He knows exactly how to play dead. He needs her to be his unseen ghost in the halls, because to the syndicate, a cleaner is just furniture. As she connects the harmless salt water, Dom's cold, tattooed fingers weakly wrap around her wrist. The physical grip is fragile, but the demonic willpower behind it anchors her to the floor. The greatest alliances in life are often born in our most vulnerable hours. He pulls her close, whispering a dark promise of the absolute reckoning he will bring when he finally rises from this early grave. Let's unpack this scene together, you and I. Dominic stares from his ruined sheets, his broken whisper slicing the silence. He promises Bridget the city if she gets him out of this bed, swearing anyone who made her feel invisible will cease to exist. Bridget gazes at this ruthless kingpin. She is a broke cleaner. He is a billionaire criminal. Yet, here, they are the only honest souls left. She pulls her hand from his grip, telling him to focus on breathing while she handles the heavy work. Stepping into those deadly corridors, the cold truth settles over her. The invisible girl is gone, replaced by a woman who just signed a blood pact with the devil. The lesson here is profound. Sometimes, true survival demands that we leave our old selves behind entirely. Picture the freezing wind howling off the East River, slicing through Bridget's threadbare jacket. Against all odds, she is seeing this impossible mission through. Securing a restricted antidote on a maid's wage should be a dead end. But Bridget was forged in the forgotten corners of Queens. She knows exactly where the city's rules fracture. She takes the rattling subway deep into the darkest veins of Brooklyn, where streetlights are smashed and steel bars choke the windows. She marches 3 grueling blocks through the frost. She is terrified, completely out of her depth, yet her resolve is absolute. She is risking her quiet life to pull a fallen king from the grave. The lesson here is that courage is never the absence of fear, but the deliberate choice to keep walking forward. She halts under the sputtering neon of Finch's apothecary. Inside sits Albert Finch, a disgraced shadow of a chemist who lost his license back in the 90s for pushing illegal drugs. Now, he runs this cramped, sour-smelling trap for the city's desperate souls. The door lets out a sad clink as she steps inside. Finch is an unsettling figure with greasy hair who barely lifts his eyes from the cluttered counter. He takes one dismissive look at Bridget, reading her exhausted posture, and serves her immediate disrespect. Lighting a cigarette, he sneers through the thick smoke, sarcastically snapping that they are fresh out of diet pills. It teaches a harsh but vital life lesson. Society will constantly try to dictate your worth based solely on your outward appearance. That cheap insult hits her square in the chest. Just another daily slice of the casual cruelty people like her endure. Bridget does not shrink back. She closes her eyes and visualizes Dominic's fading gaze, still burning with that stubborn will to live. She marches right to the scratched glass and slams down a thick stack of crisp $100 bills. It is everything she owns, pulled straight from under her mattress. Dropping her voice to a cold, dead serious hush, she tells him she does not want diet pills. She needs Prussian blue, and she needs a lot of it. Finch freezes cold, his cigarette hanging dead in the stale air. The lesson here is undeniable. True power is born the exact moment you refuse to let small-minded people dictate your boundaries or dismiss your worth. Look at this setup. You and I both know you cannot just walk into a shady joint and casually demand Prussian blue. Finch drops the sarcasm, replacing it with a dark, suspicious glare. Lowering his voice, he warns her that federal agents watch this chemical closely, as it is used strictly to flush lethal heavy metals from the blood. He squints, asking if she is handling a local rat problem. Bridget does not even blink. She simply taps that stack of $2,000 on the dirty glass and demands absolute silence. Finch stares her down, takes a long drag of his smoke, and snatches the cash. He returns moments later, sliding an unmarked bottle across the counter. The lesson we find here is grim but practical. In a broken system, unwavering resolve speaks much louder than fear. Finch taps the plastic, noting 50 pills inside. His instructions are brutal. Crush them and mix with liquid. He warns the compound stains the mouth a ghostly blue and triggers cramps that feel like swallowing shattered glass. He adds a dark caveat if the man is already at death's door. This cure might just push him through it. Bridget nods, drops the bottle into her bag, and steps back into the freezing rain. Her heart hammers against her ribs. She secured the antidote, but she still has to smuggle it inside the heavily armed Cost estate. Yet, her greatest pain becomes her superpower. To the armed guards, the tired cleaning lady remains completely invisible. The lesson is striking. The very traits that make society ignore you can become your most formidable advantage. To those armed men, she is just background noise. At 10:15, Bridget slips into the master suite and slides the deadbolt home. Dominic is wide awake, his sunken eyes snapping to the door. He looks worse today. Since Bridget stopped his morning dose of the paralytic poison, his nervous system is absorbing the raw blast of pain. Cold sweat drips down his pale face. Every breath sounds like sandpaper dragging across wood. His throat is bone dry as he softly rasps that she actually came back. Bridget rushes to his bedside, whispering that she gave him her word. She uncovers a small mortar and pestle, ready for the terrifying show to begin. This teaches us a profound truth. Genuine loyalty is proven not when it is convenient, but when it requires stepping directly into the fire. Her hands tremble as she grinds 3 capsules into a bright blue powder. Dominic watches through heavy eyelids, asking what his corrupt doctor said. Bridget explains a terrifying gamble. She swapped the poisoned IV bags before the doctor walked in, then switched them back to clean saline when he left. It is a deadly game, played by a maid with nerves of steel. Dominic lets out a ragged breath, murmuring that she is a natural. As Bridget lifts the cup, she repeats Finch's warning about the glass-like agony. Dominic flashes an arrogant fire in his eyes. He has taken bullets before. He is ready. The lesson here is stark. The only way to survive a rigged system is to quietly rewrite the rules while your enemies remain completely blind to your moves. Bridget slides her arm beneath his neck to support his weight. His skin is freezing and slick with sweat. She tips the cup, and Dominic forces the bitter blue liquid down his throat. His failing body instantly fights it, gagging on the cure, but he uses sheer willpower to choke it down. Suddenly, a massive shudder rips through his frame. His spine arches off the mattress in a snap of pure agony, and a broken groan tears from his chest. The veins in his neck bulge like ropes. Bridget panics, gripping his shoulders, begging him to hold on. Then, his paralyzed hands violently jerk up from the sheets. This brutal scene offers a harsh lesson. Healing is never a peaceful process. True recovery always demands an agonizing confrontation with the poison trying to destroy us. His fingers dig wildly into Bridget's forearms with brutal force. Driven by a mix of agony and adrenaline, he squeezes so hard a gasp escapes her lips, yet she refuses to pull away. She leans over him, acting as his anchor in the storm, whispering reassurances until the violent spasm shatters. Dominic collapses against the wet pillows, dragging air into his lungs. His lips are stained a haunting blue. He opens his eyes to see Bridget hovering over him, terrified but steadfast. Looking at the dark red marks on her arms, the impossible truth finally hits him. The life lesson here is striking. True strength is never just about raw dominance. It is having the unwavering grace to be an anchor when someone else's world is breaking apart. Staring at his hands, he whispers that he actually moved. Bridget wipes away a tear with a shaky laugh, reminding him the real challenge is keeping this a secret. For 2 weeks, that bedroom becomes a twisted stage play. The corrupt doctor struts in daily, pumping poison into the line, completely clueless that the invisible maid flushes it away. Then there is Vincent, his traitorous cousin, openly mocking the paralyzed king. Vincent brags about stealing the empire, having no idea the man in that bed is fully awake. Dominic memorizes every betrayal, silently plotting a ruthless payback. The lesson here is chillingly clear. Calculated silence is often the ultimate weapon, giving your enemies enough rope to hang themselves before you finally strike. To pull this off, Bridget takes the brutal graveyard shift. The mansion falls silent, and this forgotten cleaner becomes the sole confidant of a fallen king. Dominic's recovery is vicious and completely hidden. The Prussian blue does its dark work, stripping the heavy metals from his blood. The ashen grey fades, and the terrifying tremors vanish. By the second week, he can pull himself upright. Late one night, bathed in the glow of a bedside lamp, the apex predator fully awakens. He looks at Bridget, his voice steady and cold, demanding to know everything happening outside his door. His enemies have no idea what is coming. The ultimate lesson here is profound. The most powerful transformations always take root in the absolute darkest hours, completely out of sight. Let us step into the quiet dark together, just you and I, and observe these two fractured people. Bridget sits trembling in a faded armchair, clutching a laundry basket to her chest. She mentions the freezing rain in Queens, her tiny apartment turning into an icebox. Dominic reacts instantly. He promises her absolute luxury, a massive, heated penthouse looking out over Central Park. Yet, Bridget only gives him a weary smile. She did not drag a dying mob boss from the brink for a real estate upgrade. This rejection completely fractures his worldview. His voice drops into a demanding whisper, asking why she saved him at all. It shows us a simple truth we often forget. The fiercest loyalty cannot be purchased with money. It is only forged through shared suffering. The room is heavy with years of unspoken trauma. The apex predator is fully awake, his sharp gaze locked onto the terrified woman. He genuinely asks why she would risk her safety to pull a monster back from the ledge. Bridget freezes, her rough hands twisting her uniform. Looking down, she carries the posture of someone crushed by constant judgment. In a broken whisper, she confesses she knows what it feels like to be trapped in a body the world threw away. To his enemies, he is a walking corpse. To the guests she serves, she's an invisible joke. They are two ghosts, entirely written off. She simply wanted to prove those blind observers wrong. Remember this simple truth: never underestimate the people society ignores. They watch from the shadows, and they see everything. The silence in the bedroom presses down heavily. Dominic breaks the tension, his deep voice drawing her near. Bridget hesitates, her pulse hammering. She edges toward the mattress, aware of her scratchy uniform. He has a past lined with flawless women, and she feels completely out of her depth. But Dominic reaches out, his hand perfectly steady. He does not grab her. His fingers gently wrap around her hip, resting against the curve of her waist. Bridget goes still, her breath catching. No one has ever touched her with such reverence. His grey eyes find hers, cutting right through her deepest insecurities, and he murmurs that the rest of the world is completely blind. It teaches us something profound. True worth is often only recognized by those who have learned to survive in the dark. He tells her the men in his brutal syndicate surround themselves with hollow illusions. But to him, she is the most real thing he has ever seen. His voice drops, confessing she holds more raw courage than his entire crew of killers. His thumb traces the rough fabric of her apron. He asks if she honestly believes he looks at her and sees a punchline. Pulling her closer, his gaze burning into hers, he declares he sees a queen. He sees the woman who walked into a lion den and refused to break. Bridget gasps, her vision blurring with tears. The possessiveness in his tone is terrifying, yet intoxicating. She is no longer an invisible ghost with a mop. She is the steady anchor keeping a dangerous man tethered to reality. It shows us something beautiful. True courage, no matter how quietly it speaks, always earns its crown. She reaches out, trembling fingers sinking into his dark hair. The gi surrenders, leaning into her fragile touch. Here is a lethal crime boss finding peace with the woman the world tossed aside. But do not get comfortable. That sanctuary shatters the next morning. Bridget is in the hallway, pushing her mop when Dr. Pendleton bursts from the master suite. His arrogant swagger is gone. His face is ghost white, hands shaking as he dials his phone. Her survival instincts take over. She ducks behind a marble pillar, holding her breath to listen. She hears Pendleton hiss into the receiver, his voice tight with panic. He warns Vincent they have a massive problem. Their dark secret is bleeding into the light. Never forget this hard lesson. In a house built on betrayal, peace is always the very first casualty. You and I are going to watch this nightmare unravel together. Pendleton, the morally bankrupt doctor, is sweating bullets on the phone with Vincent, the backstabbing cousin. Pendleton just ran the Don's blood work, and the impossible happened. The paralytic poison is failing. It is washing out of Dominic's system. Pendleton is frantic, whining that it makes zero sense because nobody except the invisible cleaning staff ever enters that room. But cornered rats always bite, and they make a desperate choice. Tonight, Pendleton will hit Dominic with a fatal dose of potassium chloride to fake a sudden heart attack. Here is a vital lesson to carry with you. If you decide to bury a king, you better make sure your dirt is heavy enough to keep him down. Otherwise, the open grave belongs to you. Hidden in the shadows, Bridget listens as her blood turns to ice. They are going to execute Dominic tonight. The countdown has begun. She waits for agonizing seconds until the corrupt doctor leaves the hallway. Once he vanishes, she bolts. She throws herself into the master bedroom, slamming the heavy locks into place. And there he is. Dominic is out of bed, muscles straining as he grinds out brutal push-ups against the mattress, fighting to reclaim his strength. He sees her terrified face, and a ruthless Don instantly returns. He demands to know what is wrong. Gasping for air, she reveals the illusion is over. The doctor knows he is healing, and the lethal injection is coming tonight. Listen closely to this. Never wait for the dark storm to break before you decide to reinforce your walls. When Bridget explains the needle means a fatal heart attack, you see the violent storm gather in Dominic's eyes. But this cold resilience is exactly why he wears the crown. He does not panic. His sharp mind goes straight to brutal mathematics. He confesses he has the grip strength to fire a weapon, but tearing through 30 armed mercenaries? Impossible. He needs his loyal men on the outside, the ones untouched by Vincent's treason. But his cousin stole his phone. Then a dark smirk cuts across Dominic's face. He reveals a masterstroke. He has an encrypted satellite phone and a coded black book buried in a hidden floor safe inside his old office. Take this deeply to heart. Always bury a silent backup plan in the shadows where your arrogant enemies would never think to dig. The nightmare tightens its grip. Vincent claimed that exact office as his trophy room. Dominic explains that with the satellite phone, he can summon a strike team to bathe Vincent's crew in fire. But the catch is suicidal. The office sits on the heavily guarded first floor, where Vincent is hosting a dinner with union bosses. Dominic grips Bridget's arms, his fingers like iron, anchoring his intense stare into her soul. He needs her to walk into hell, crack the safe, and return before the Reaper arrives with a syringe. Bridget is trembling, begging to know how a maid sneaks past mob enforcers. His answer is chillingly simple. She is a ghost. Think about the profound truth hidden here. The exact trait that makes you invisible to a judging world can suddenly become your most lethal superpower. Dominic pours dark, street-forged wisdom into her mind. He tells her to grip her cart, bleed into the shadows, and weaponize their blind arrogance. He whispers a 6-digit code. mapping out the false floorboard under a Persian rug beneath his old desk. Stripping away his armor, the boss confesses his very life now rests in her hands. Bridget stares at this terrifying Don. He is a monster to the world, but the only man who ever treated her like a queen. She swallows her paralyzing fear and nods. She will risk it all. We cut to the evening hours. The mansion hums with lethal danger. Vincent is downstairs playing king, drinking with corrupt union leaders. Remember this well. True loyalty is never bought with cheap words. It is only forged in fire when everything is on the line. The air reeks of expensive cigars and stolen authority. Bridget grips her squeaky cart, inching her way down the corridor. Her drab grey uniform feels like a pathetic shield. Yet simultaneously it feels like a screaming bullseye. Her heart beats with such violent force she fears the armed hitman will hear it. Up ahead, two massive guards block the dining room. But Dominic's prophecy holds true. Their cold eyes slide right over her, like she is nothing but dust on the floor. She drifts past their lethal gaze, fading quietly into the east wing, where Vincent claimed the Don's study. The shadowy hall is empty. She pushes the heavy oak door and slips into the belly of the beast. Always remember this lesson. A man's suffocating arrogance will completely blind him to the quiet threat standing right in front of his face. You step into that stolen office, and the room simply radiates disrespect. Vincent replaced Dominic's quiet elegance with loud, flashy garbage. Bridget drops hard to her knees beside the massive desk, ignoring the sharp flare of pain in her tired joints. She shoves back the Persian rug, her desperate fingers scrambling across the hardwood until they catch a microscopic flaw, the hidden seam. She presses down, and with a soft whir, a glowing keypad rises from the wood. Her hands tremble violently, nearly slipping on the illuminated keys as she types 472911. The truth hidden in this room is profound. Loud, flashy confidence is usually nothing but a fragile mask. Real, undeniable power stays quietly buried beneath the floorboards, patiently waiting for the right moment to strike. Let's break down this scene together. A hollow click fractures the silence. Bridget pries back the floorboard, unearthing the Don's hidden arsenal, a weathered ledger and a bulky satellite phone. She buries the device deep within her oversized uniform. Her invisible status as a maid provides the ultimate camouflage for a warlord's weapon. Before she can smooth the rug, a heavy thud echoes from the hall. It is Vincent. His entitled voice booms, demanding his lost contracts. Cold dread grips Bridget's throat as her heart hammers against her ribs. We see a vital truth unfold here. True survival is not about executing a flawless plan in the shadows, but rather how rapidly you can adapt the very second a trap snaps shut. Driven by pure instinct, Bridget snatches a spray bottle and rag, pivoting to scrub the glass just as the heavy doors swing open. Vincent strides into the room, flanked by an imposing wall of muscle. He freezes. His predatory eyes lock onto her, piercing her for 3 agonizing seconds. The silence stretches into something venomous. Bridget tightens her grip on the bottle, acutely aware of the heavy satellite phone pressing against her ribs. Vincent sneers with absolute disgust, demanding to know why a peasant is polluting his space. Without hesitation, she shrinks her posture, adopting the mask's clueless, terrified worker. We learn a vital truth here. When an arrogant predator corners you, the most brilliant defense strategy is often to simply play the fool. The air is suffocating as Bridget weaponizes her fear. She forces her voice into a trembling pitch, embodying the helpless servant. She stammers out frantic apologies, insisting the housekeeper ordered her to clean. Vincent glares down at her shaking frame. For a split second, Genuine suspicion flickers across his face, but his overwhelming superiority complex smothers it. He cruelly dismisses her as a sweating pig, barking at her to leave before she pollutes his office. Bridget keeps her gaze fastened to the floor, whispering apologies as she retreats. The tragedy of absolute arrogance is vividly captured here. Our egos paint a false picture of reality, and that unchecked pride will always blind us to the quiet threats standing right in front of us. Every step Bridget takes toward her cart feels like wading through thick cement. Her heart beats a violent rhythm against her ribs. If Vincent had bothered to look closely, if he had noticed the rigid shape concealed beneath her uniform, she would be a corpse. The massive enforcer tracks her exit with hollow eyes as she shuffles into the corridor. The heavy door finally clicks shut, and the gravity of her survival crashes down. Bridget collapses against the cold metal, pulling air into her burning lungs. She walked through the fire and emerged untouched. You and I can take a profound lesson from this moment. Always maintain your humility, because the unnoticed people you choose to casually look down upon might just be the ones holding your fate in their hands. Her invisibility just purchased a second chance at life, but the clock is ruthlessly ticking. Abandoning all caution, she throws herself into the service elevator, slamming the button for the third floor. It is 8:45 in the evening, and the shadow of death is already creeping through the gates. Ditching her cart, she sprints into the master suite. There he is. Dominic sits upright, sharply dressed in stolen black slacks and a dark shirt. His physical form looks hollowed out and starved, but his aura is terrifyingly absolute. The fallen king has risen for war. He demands his prize, and she presents the heavy black phone. Life teaches us this unyielding reality over and over again. When you can feel the storm finally breaking on the horizon, you had better be standing ready to face the flood. The expression washing over Dominic's face is pure nightmare fuel. We see the cold smile of an apex predator who finally has his prey cornered. The glowing screen illuminates the dark room, fully charged and untraceable. His eyes blaze with a violent respect as he congratulates Bridget for pulling off the impossible. He promises her a front row seat to the obliteration of his traitorous bloodline. He punches in a number buried deep in his memory. When a voice answers, Dominic speaks with the bone-chilling authority of the true Don. He simply says he is back, and orders them to gather the strike team. The bitter lesson woven into this scene is undeniable. Vengeance is a poison best served ice cold, striking with absolute precision, and leaving zero room for mercy or regret. Stick with me here, because this is where their underworld fractures. Dominic delivers the coldest orders into that receiver. He informs Carlo that cousin Vincent is a venomous snake, and the corrupt doctor is a dead man. He demands them both flatlined within the hour. Carlo gasps through the speaker, but Dominic merely growls that he is awake and reclaiming his empire. He drops the phone and rises. His muscles tremble from months of atrophy, yet he plants his feet like an immovable titan. Bridget watches, paralyzed as this shadow engulfs the bedroom. He retrieves a heavy 1911 pistol and sharply racks the slide. Let this moment remind you of a core truth in life. Never count a resilient survivor out until the dirt is settled over their grave. The metallic clack of the slide echoes through the room, like a tolling bell for the damned. Out in the corridor, approaching footsteps pair with the dreadful squeal of a medical cart. Bridget's eyes widen with terror as she whispers the doctor's name. Dominic locks onto the heavy oak doors with the piercing gaze of a hunting hawk, leveling his weapon dead center. He commands Bridget to retreat into the shadows. She scrambles into the dark alcove, her chest heaving with silent sobs. The brass doorknob slowly turns, and Dr. Pendleton steps inside, utterly blind to his doom, holding a syringe filled with lethal poison. We see this tragic irony so often in life. The exact moment you arrogantly believe you have won is usually the very second fate arrives to collect its debt. Pendleton pushes his cart forward, muttering complaints detached from the horrific murder he is about to commit. He lets out an arrogant sigh, whispering that it is time to end the charade. But as he looks forward, he realizes the mattress is empty. Before his brain can process this impossible reality, a massive hand erupts from the shadows and brutally closes around his windpipe. Dominic lifts the doctor off his feet, slamming him violently against the wall. The syringe scatters across the rug. Pendleton's eyes bulge with horror as he stares at the ghost he came to assassinate. Dominic whispers a chilling greeting, pressing the cold steel barrel directly to his temple. The ultimate lesson here is clear. Blind arrogance will always be the shovel that digs your final grave. The Don leans in close. His voice drops to a gravelly whisper, mocking the doctor by noting he was searching for a permanent cure. The absolute malice radiating from Dominic is heavy enough to crush bone. Pendleton dangles helplessly, his leather shoes frantically kicking at empty space. He chokes out pathetic excuses, his terrified face flushing a bruised purple. He sobs that Vincent forced his hand, begging for sympathy like a cornered rat. But Dominic's icy eyes are devoid of anything human. He lowers the doctor just enough for his toes to scrape the floor, driving that heavy barrel aggressively against his temple until it breaks the skin. We must remember this harsh truth. Playing the helpless victim at the end will never erase the choices you willingly made. In the beginning, a single dark drop of blood traces a path down the doctor's terrified face. Dominic strips away every illusion, his voice vibrating with raw fury as he details the betrayal. He calls Arthur out by name, furious that this man watched him rot in a paralyzed state, laughing with the cousin who ordered the hit. Pendleton is practically foaming at the mouth. He sobs violently, frantically offering offshore accounts and endless cash to buy back his life. Dominic gifts him a cruel, hollow smile. He whispers that he does not want money. He only wants his prescribed medicine. With a sickening crunch, Dominic kicks the doctor's knees out, dropping him hard to the floor. The moral lesson echoes loudly here. True integrity is priceless, and no amount of wealth can ever buy back a broken soul. Let's examine this carefully. With the pistol locked on the doctor's forehead, Dominic bends down. He retrieves the lethal syringe and tosses it onto the traitor's chest. The command is chillingly simple. Take it. Pendleton stares at his poison, screaming that the chemical will stop his heart in seconds. But the Don is an immovable glacier, offering a terrible choice. Push the plunger, or take a bullet to the stomach and spend 3 agonizing hours bleeding out. The countdown begins. 1. Pendleton wails, begging for a mercy he never showed. 2. Dominic's finger tightens on the trigger. The doctor's hands shake around the plastic tube. It is a terrifying lesson to learn. The malice you prepare for someone else will eventually land squarely on your own chest. Listen closely to how this ends, because it reveals the core of who these characters are. Pendleton searches the Don's eyes for pity, finding only an unforgiving dark abyss. With a broken cry, he drives the needle into his thigh and pushes the plunger. Dominic steps back, watching the violent end. 5 seconds later, the traitor seizes against the marble and is gone. Bridget is plastered against the wall, trembling, her hands clamped over her mouth to trap her screams. She has never seen life extinguished so brutally. But then a profound shift happens. The monster vanishes. Dominic walks over, the malice draining away, and gently pulls her hands from her fist again. Let this sink in. True strength is knowing when you need to be a ruthless monster and when you must return to being human. Dominic reaches out, his thumb catching the tear on her cheek. His voice is a low rumble, commanding her attention. He does not sugarcoat reality. He admits his world is built on blood. Yet, he swears to burn this city to white ash before letting violence touch her. Before the vow can settle, the muffled thud of a suppressed gunshot shatters the silence. Carlo has breached the floor below. Dominic instantly turns to ice. He loads spare magazines into his coat and checks his weapon, pulling her into the dark. Life teaches us something critical here. Build a circle of people who will gladly go to war for you, but you must be the first one willing to stand as their shield when the bullets actually start flying. His hand closes over hers, acting as an iron anchor against the hurricane of violence. They slip out of the master suite, bleeding into the shadows of the third floor. Today, you and I are watching a palace dripping in velvet transform into a war zone. Down below them, the symphony of chaos echoes off the walls. Panicked men scream as suppressed gunfire coughs through the cold air. Carlo and his strike team move like phantoms, clearing the estate with terrifying surgical precision. Dominic and Bridget push forward, finally reaching the mahogany staircase. Look at this moment and remember a simple truth. Peace is merely a fragile pane of glass, and when it inevitably shatters, you desperately need blind loyalty standing right by your side. Down in the dim shadows of the foyer, traitorous guards bleed out across the marble. Carlo's men sweep the lower floor. Suddenly, an enforcer looks up toward the staircase and freezes. He lowers his weapon, tapping his earpiece with trembling fingers to whisper that the boss is miraculously walking. Dominic descends those stairs like a resurrected king, reclaiming his kingdom, his broad shoulders shielding Bridget from the carnage. His voice rolls like low thunder, demanding to know where his cousin is hiding. Carlo steps from the kitchen, gesturing toward the dining room doors. Take a heavy lesson from this scene. True authority never has to scream for attention. People naturally fall in line because of the undeniable weight of who you really are. Carlo stares at Dominic, then looks at the terrified cleaning woman clutching his hand. He asks no questions, offering a slow, respectful nod. He murmurs that the room is surrounded, and the corrupt union bosses are trapped inside. Dominic lets his voice drop into a lethal growl, swearing nobody touches Vincent but him. He releases Bridget, ordering her to stay back, but she refuses to hide. Running on pure adrenaline, she shakes her head, telling this terrifying man she will not let him out of her sight in case his legs fail. Dominic gives her a dark, captivated smirk. Keep this simple truth in mind. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is choosing to stand your ground even when your knees are violently shaking. Dominic leans in, whispering that if he collapses, she can drag him the rest of the way. They approach the massive oak doors. He does not even bother reaching for the handles. Instead, he drives his heavy boot into the solid wood with terrifying force. The brass latch shatters, and the doors fly open with the deafening roar of a detonated bomb. Inside that room, time simply stops breathing. Vincent sits at the head of the table like a pathetic, fake king, a crystal glass of scotch frozen halfway to his open mouth. 5 corrupt underworld figures stare at the doorway in absolute horror. Remember this crucial life lesson. Sometimes you cannot just knock politely on the doors of life. You have to physically kick them off their hinges to demand the respect you truly deserve. The table is a graveyard of half-eaten steaks, lobster shells, and shady contracts. When Vincent registers the sight of his cousin, every drop of color drains from his skin. He looks exactly like a guilty man watching a ghost crawl out of the damp earth. His fingers go numb, and his glass shatters against the hardwood floor, spilling scotch into the rug. Dominic steps fully into the chandelier light, radiating a dark, westy, suffocating power. He casually wishes the men a good evening, asking if he interrupted their rich dessert. His heavy pistol hangs loosely at his side, while his loyal enforcers fan out. Keep this simple life lesson close to your heart. You can enjoy the stolen feast for a while, but eventually you will have to pay the heavy bill for everything you greedily took. Stick with me, because we are about to watch the devastating price of betrayal. Bridget presses against the velvet curtains, watching the true king of the underworld reclaim his throne. Vincent is practically weeping now, throwing his shaking hands up like a coward. He stammers out desperate excuses, crying that a doctor said Dominic was dying, claiming he only wanted to protect their legacy. What a pathetic lie. Dominic steps closer, every heavy footstep echoing like an executioner's march. He drops a crushing truth. Vincent was selling their docks to the Russians and paying heavily to pump poison into his cousin's veins. Hear this lesson clearly. Never drive a knife into the back of those who trust you, because the brutal truth will always hunt you down and expose your sins. The corrupt union bosses are losing their minds. Hoffman sweats profusely, swearing loudly they thought Dominic was terminal. Without looking away from his trembling cousin, Dominic softly promises to cut out Hoffman's tongue if he speaks again. In mere seconds, Vincent's arrogant swagger evaporates. He drops heavily to his knees on the ruined carpet, sobbing like a terrified child. He begs for mercy, crying about how they are blood, finally confessing his deep jealousy. He just wanted a little taste of the city's respect. Dominic looms over this cowering snake with dead, cold eyes. Remember this simple life lesson. You can never force people to truly respect you. You must put in the agonizing, honest work to build that unyielding loyalty from the ground up. Dominic coldly tells his cousin that respect is never stolen while a man is trapped in a paralyzed body. Suddenly, the tense atmosphere shatters. A union boss, tied to the Russian mob, realizes the Don will not leave any loose ends breathing tonight. Desperation takes over, and his hand slides into his jacket for a hidden revolver. But Bridget is watching from the shadows like a hawk. She catches the unnatural twitch of his shoulder. She does not freeze. Running on the fierce adrenaline of a woman protecting the man who truly sees her, she screams for Dominic to watch his left and lunges into the line of fire. Take this vital life lesson to heart. True loyalty is not just smiling when the sun shines. It is bravely stepping into the dangerous crossfire when everything goes wrong. Bridget throws her weight against a heavy brass serving cart loaded with silver dishes. It accelerates like a runaway train, violently smashing into the union boss just as he yanks his revolver free. The sickening crunch of ribs echoes as boiling gravy dumps over his lap. The man shrieks in agony, his aim thrown off as a stray bullet blasts the crystal chandelier above. Shards of sharp glass rain down. Anyone else would have ducked for cover, but Dominic does not even blink. He pivots on his heel, raises his weapon in a blinding flash, and drops the traitor with one perfect shot between the eyes. Keep this simple life lesson in mind. Thinking fast on your feet and using your environment will always defeat mindless, brute strength in the real world. Chaos erupts as the enforcers violently shove the union bosses face down onto the carpet, jamming cold rifles into their expensive suits. Dominic turns his deadly focus back to Vincent, who is trembling like a broken machine. Then his dark eyes drift to Bridget. She breathes heavily, clutching her bruised shoulder, but she stands incredibly tall. She is a fierce warrior, disguised in a faded grey cleaning apron. A rare look of protective devotion washes over Dominic's face. He gestures toward Bridget and asks his pathetic cousin if he truly sees her now, reminding Vincent that he treated this brilliant woman like garbage. Keep this life lesson close today. Never underestimate the quiet people working in the background, because their hidden strength will always surprise you. Dominic tears his cousin apart, his voice dripping with venom. He points out that Vincent treated Bridget like a ghost. This arrogant fool let her walk past him while planning a murder, simply because a maid did not fit his shallow worldview. Vincent stares at Bridget in terror, crying that she is just a cleaning lady. Dominic coldly corrects him. She is the genius who coded the poison plot. She smuggled the cure into his guarded room and stole his phone. Vincent's jaw unhinges. The brutal realization that his Mafia takeover was destroyed by the cleaning staff he mocked completely shatters his mind. He lets out a broken laugh. Learn this vital life lesson today. Pure arrogance will always make you blind to the incredibly powerful people standing right in front of your face. Dominic stands like a monument, proclaiming that since Bridget saved his life, the keys to his underworld empire now rest in her hands. The poetic irony is thick, given her profound distaste for his traitorous cousin. Vincent crumbles to his knees, his desperate pleas evaporating. A single, deafening gunshot shatters the room. Vincent collapses onto an antique Persian rug, his hollow betrayal dissolving in spilled whiskey. The usurper is dead. Without a second glance at the trembling loyalists, Dominic steps over the broken glass. The most feared phantom in New York lets his weapon fall, pulling Bridget into a fierce embrace. Let this sit with you. True gratitude is not just saying a polite thank you. It is fiercely elevating the one person who stood as your shield when you had absolutely nothing left to offer. Dominic ignores the armed enforcers, leaning in to whisper that her brilliance is utterly terrifying. The narrative jumps forward 6 months. The syndicate has mutated into something paranoid and infinitely deadlier. Yet the true shock waving through the criminal elite is not that Dominic clawed his way out of the grave. It is the sovereign queen ruling beside him. Bridget sits in the guarded dining room, draped in custom emerald silk and heavy diamonds. The exhausted cleaning woman is a ghost. In her place sits a fierce tactician who understands the exact gravity of her newfound power. You and I can extract a vital truth from this transformation. Never let a mundane label dictate your worth. Your capacity to command always stretches far beyond what ordinary eyes can see on the surface. Framed across the heavy table, Dominic looks immaculate in a sharp black tuxedo. The icy glare that paralyzes the city melts into pure obsession the moment his eyes settle on Bridget. She catches his stare, offering a knowing smirk over her heavy red wine, teasing him to look away. Dominic leans in, his voice a smooth hum, confessing he is simply admiring his empire. Bridget counters immediately with the mind of a seasoned strategist. She warns him to fund the pensions of the dock workers, understanding a fundamental law of power. If you starve the roots, the tree will collapse. The lesson embedded here is undeniably profound. True leadership requires fiercely protecting your everyday workers, because those invisible hands are the very foundation holding your entire world together. Dominic flashes a slow, predatory smile, recognizing that her sharp intellect is the most dangerous weapon in his arsenal. Calling her his queen, he yields to her logic. This quiet intimacy shatters as the heavy oak doors swing wide, Sal the Snake, a rival boss dripping with unearned arrogance, struts in to settle a bitter turf war. He gives Dominic a rigid nod, but his calculating eyes dart to Bridget. A raw flash of disgust twists his face. Sal belongs to an old world where women are mere trophies, entirely unprepared for a fearless equal sitting at the apex of the syndicate. This moment teaches us a vital truth. You must never judge someone by their outward shell, because authentic, dangerous power rarely bothers to wrap itself in predictable and shallow societal stereotypes. Sal lets out a greasy chuckle, mocking Dominic for dining with the hired help. The room drops to a scuffling freeze. Notice how Bridget does not even blink. She simply lowers her glass, locking a dead-eyed stare onto the rival. Dominic does not yell. He rises with a terrifying, calculated silence, tracing the edge of the table until he stands directly behind Sal. Before the snake can process his fatal misstep, Dominic seizes his neck. With zero hesitation, he drives Sal's face straight down into the solid mahogany. Porcelain shatters. Sal screams as his nose collapses with a sickening crunch. The cinematic violence here carries a brutal philosophy. Keep your arrogance in check when standing inside another person's territory, or you will inevitably pay a devastating price. Dominic pins the bleeding mobster against the polished wood, leaning close to his ear. His whisper vibrates with territorial rage, informing Sal that he is lucky just to breathe her air. He reminds the coward that while parasites like him dug graves, Bridget pulled the king out of one. Dominic calmly promises to take his eyes if he ever disrespects her again, declaring the disputed downtown territory now belongs exclusively to his wife. Sal scrambles backward, clutching his ruined face, and flees into the night. The violence was a sudden wave that vanished instantly. Dominic turns back to his queen, his eyes pitch black with adrenaline. The takeaway is absolute. A truly loyal partner will fiercely defend your honor without a single fraction of hesitation. Dominic steps back to her side, and the monster recedes. He takes her hand, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles, apologizing for the mess. Bridget studies the blood on the table, then looks at this kingpin, who treats her like a deity. She reaches out, tracing his jawline. Let us unpack this stunning contrast together. 6 months ago, she walked into the underworld expecting to be devoured. Instead, she tamed the beast. She smiles with chilling authority, whispering that it is fine, because she knows exactly how to clean up a spill. The invisible maid did not just survive this brutal world, she conquered it. The message rings loud and clear. Never let anyone make you feel small. The person sweeping the floors today might just own the entire empire tomorrow. Bridget proves that untouchable power does not come from conforming to rigid expectations. It is forged the moment you step out of the shadows to claim what you deserve. Conversely, Dominic discovered that the most devastating weapon he possessed was never a piece of artillery. It was the fiercely intelligent queen who captured his ruthless heart and reshaped his syndicate. Looking back at that sterile hospital room, you and I knew this cycle of vengeance would become legendary. The traitors focused on the king, completely blind to the queen, sweeping the board. If you enjoyed dissecting Bridget's masterful climb from an invisible worker to the undisputed architect of the Mafia, do not forget to hit that subscribe button. I will see you in the next deep dive.